get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Corporate and Executive Education at the Brown School of Professional Studies. I'm also joined today by Karen Scanlon, who is our Graduate Recruitment Coordinator who focuses on the non-degree programs. And we are both really excited to be here with you today to talk a little bit about the School of Professional Studies, about conscious inclusion, most importantly, and also about our Applied Inclusive Leadership Strategy Certificate. Oh, wow, I see we have someone who's joining from Nigeria. That's amazing. Thank you so much for making the time. I know that times are really uncertain right now, and as a result, it can be more difficult than ever to make time, space, and prioritization for things that could feel like long-term goals rather than short-term priorities. But this is the time when things like inclusive leadership actually matters more than ever. We'll look at this together, and Jarvis is going to go over this as well. But the data is really, really clear and not controversial, the data part itself, that inclusive leadership works. Whether you are here today because you are looking to achieve improved results with possibly even less, a lot of us are being asked to do more with less, or you're here because you are already a passionate advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you are in the right place because the research shows that inclusive organizations with equitable practices are more likely to be able to solve problems more effectively and better in a way that solves the problem in the long term and better able to retain staff. And here at the School of Professional Studies, our mission is to empower you with the resources, networks, and skills that you need to change the way the world works for good. And I think that all of those measures of better results, happier employees, is a really strong indicator that you have indeed changed the way the world works for good. So that's why we're so passionate about this topic and this program. So how this is going to work, how this webinar is going to work, is that I am going to bring up a recording of Jarvis talking about how to overcome implicit bias and create consciously inclusive organizations. I will then give you an overview of how you could continue to learn from Jarvis by joining our Applied Inclusive Leadership Strategies Certificate. And then Jarvis is going to join us live to answer your questions. And it is just my great honor to get to virtually introduce you to Jarvis because he is someone that I learn something from every single time. And I have had the great privilege of getting to listen to this talk multiple times, but I catch something new every time. Jarvis has had an incredible career. He led diversity inclusion initiatives at Snap, at Google, and then most recently as a chief diversity officer for Nike. He's been recognized as in the Forbes 30 under 30 category and also as a person to look out for on several lists. Just a couple of years ago, he decided to create his own consultancy practice called the Rainbow Disruption, which has been hired by many leading companies to help lead the way through both sticky situations and also to optimize for the future, to prepare for the future. He's one of the most dynamic speakers I know, and that is why I feel so privileged that he is joining us today to lead us in this session, and that he is also the creator of and instructor for our Applied Inclusive Leadership Strategies Certificate. He's also a proud member of the Brown community. He's a professor of the practice and leadership here, and he is also an alum of our EMBA program. So with that, I am really happy to bring up the recording first of his presentation, and then we'll talk a little bit about the program, and then he'll join us live for Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Allison, for having me. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining our conversation today. I have had such a great pleasure getting to partner with my alma mater, Brown University, on this incredible Applied DEI Strategies Certificate program. Our very first cohort was so wonderful, with students coming from so many varied backgrounds and experiences coming together to better understand how do we bridge the theoretical with the practical to be able to foster empowering impact connected to how we build programs that thrive connected to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You see, over the course of the last several years, we've seen such an amplification of how diversity, equity, and inclusion comes to life in its reality and realized experiences in the workplace. And while many organizations have found new and refined ways to ultimately create support systems for people and teams, the infrastructure alone will not do the job. We need empowered and proactive leaders like each and every one of you, whether you are a part of an ERG group or an employee resource group in your organization, a DEI leader yourself or a part of a DEI team, an HR leader, or just a people manager or interested executive who wants to grow or hone in your skills, it's absolutely imperative that we learn the core tenets for how we build approaches to equity and inclusion that thrive. Today, I'll be giving a very brief lecture on the discussion of conscious inclusion, discussing exactly what it is. What are some barriers or challenges to how we got here? And ultimately, how do we change the game to make stronger impact over time? First and foremost, while a lot of organizations have been able to explore the reality of their journey by understanding the contours of diversity, so much of their work has started or stopped with aims toward representation. You see, for so many organizations, they put in place perspectives on how to better hire through the lens of diversity recruitment. Some leading organizations think about talent management systems and platforms to drive promotion, retention, and development. However, the buck typically stops there. We create these environments where we diversify people and teams within organizations, not realizing that while the beauty of diversity, one often rooted in both ethical principles around doing the right thing and business focused principles of the impact on revenue generation and profitability, can go a long way. Bringing folks together without giving them the infrastructure for how to navigate and thrive in environments of change and across lines of difference is where we often see challenges happen. So we move into the space of equity. Few organizations actually seek to better understand the essence of equity. You see, the concept or philosophy of equity is one often deemed very different than that of the philosophy of equality. Take, for example, this perspective. I live in Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles, California these days. And so let's imagine that I go into downtown LA and I have $1,500 to disperse between three people. I'm going to give $500 to each of them directly. $500 goes to an individual who actually is a Wall Street banker. She's in town from New York City and has just taken some of her colleagues out to dinner the night before. That dinner exceeded more than double the $500 that I'm giving her, but she takes it anyway. In the second example, I encountered an individual who has been experiencing homelessness for the last 2 years. And this $500 enables them to not only seek refuge and opportunity for pursuing housing, but it allows them to explore career opportunities, seek employment. Or what about the third person who has recently lost a family member? And this $500 is actually the last amount that they need to ensure that their loved one can go in peace. You'll notice in all three of these situations, the $500 was used in different ways or different spaces, but I gave them all exactly the same. That's the concept or philosophy of equality. Equity, on the other hand, seeks to understand the different dimensions that each of these individuals needs to be successful and ultimately distributes resources to more effectively assist them. For example, what if just by giving the individual who is experiencing homelessness $750, we're now able to ensure that they have a suit for that job interview, that we can connect them with employment and career services so that they can change and promote an entirely different and better life for their family? What if we were to add an additional $500 to the individual that has recently experienced a loss of life in their family, and this allows them to extend bereavement from their hourly job of employment, enabling them to spend more time with people and family members? You see, equity incentivizes us to think differently about how we engage with different communities and populations of people. For organizations that prioritize equity, they find ways to better manage communities and teams, not by positioning them through massive acronyms like LGBTQIA or BIPOC, but rather by considering us through the disaggregated lenses of the work that we need to support the realities of our own experiences. It forces us to consider that the experiences, for example, of white women are different than those of Black trans women. The experiences of cisgendered gay men like myself are different than those experiences of non binary identified individuals or intersex individuals in our workspaces. Equity enables us to create structures and systems that move beyond programs and initiatives. But even when we've done a really nice job at building approaches to representation and can hopefully keep and retain talent over time, even if we built equitable approaches to our systems and have created the conditions for success, inclusion is often a lost art in the reality of which we're building. But exactly what is it? Inclusion is oftentimes that felt experience that says if the reality of the celebration, not just tolerance of my diversity, is revealed, can my organization actually support me in meaningful ways that incentivize me to want to be retained within this workplace? Inclusion are those intentional actions that happen throughout an organization that create the conditions where not only trust, but real and apparent psychological safety is felt in the workplace. In research studies done by organizations like Google in 2016, such as their rework study, where they looked at over 400 teams within their organization, they found that commitment to the work, workers seeing value in what they do, organizational structure and clarity are but building blocks. The number one approach that allows for highly successful and high performing teams is psychological safety, defined as a lack of fear from taking risk and making mistakes without repercussion or retribution for trying to grow the impact of the business. Do you ensure that psychological safety is built and felt within your organization? Do you create the conditions to make sure that all employees have not only the capabilities, but the capacities that they need to promote psychological safety in the workplace? The reality, even with our best efforts and best intent, there are a number of barriers that negatively impact the likelihood that we can build effective approaches to the fostering of conscious inclusion at work. One of those barriers is bias. But don't take my word for it. Take a look at this quick video that explores the impact of some of these types of biases on people's lives and realities.
If a woman exhibits what are considered more masculine behaviors, such as being assertive, speaking out, they're described very differently.
A man in my office felt as though my tone was off-putting and abrasive.
What we found in our work around unconscious gender bias is that women really face a double bind.
I really felt as though it was important to be liked in my job, and so I really took it to heart. And I started to change the way that I spoke to people, but it didn't feel natural. My natural way is to actually be certain and to be confident and to be very clear on what I expect from people.
Damned if you do, doomed if you don't. Unconscious gender biases has a direct link as well to the gender pay gap.
It was 10 or 12 years ago, and I'd taken on a couple more accounts, had won a good amount of new business for the office, and it came time for review. And I asked my manager, who was a woman, whether or not I could be looked at for a raise. The response I got was that I was being difficult and that I was asking for more than what I deserved. And I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken. I was very tired because I had PD at home and I was working really hard. But it was heartbreaking.
For women of color, they face all of these barriers that all women face, but you layer on the complexities and the biases against various race ethnicities.
As a woman and as a woman of color and as an African American woman, those are three things against me. And when I get in certain rooms, I am invisible. And that is very painful.
What we have found is that unconscious gender bias gets into talent management systems. It impacts career advancement.
In the agency side, I would watch as male counterparts would get promoted or would get included in meetings I wasn't getting included in. You didn't see as many women at the top to emulate or, aspire to.
As you can tell by the very powerful sentiments from Dr. Robinson, Dr. Guo, and Dr. Amber G, the reality is conscious inclusion is when we strategically execute a practical approach to driving thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. It allows us to value and leverage differences to achieve superior results. So what then is the differentiating factor that promotes impact with conscious inclusion? It is not necessarily a belief in the process of changing hearts and minds, of which people will often tell you that diversity, equity, and inclusion work is all about. On the contrary, it's about changing mindsets and behaviors. As we move along our journey of unawareness and being a bystander to actually productively impacting at the level of advocacy and activism. But as you heard from Dr. Robinson, there are so many different elements that can be inhibiting factors to how we see this, of which we'll walk through 3 quick ones today. In the video, you saw the impact of bias. Next, we'll talk about the implication of identity covering. And finally, the lack of effective cultural humility. First and foremost, bias plays out in so many ways in our organizations. The statistics, science, and research are clear. We consume 11 million bits of information every single second. And yet, folks, we only consciously process about 40 of those bits. What's more, 2% of our emotional cognition is processed through our conscious mind. What happens to the rest of it? We leverage our subconscious and our unconscious to process it. But in an attempt to take a mental shortcut, think about if you're driving down the street and you're using a GPS, but you know a faster way to get there based on your previous experience. You're going to take some shortcuts. What happens, though, if down one of those shortcuts it's a construction zone, actually making your commute much larger? This is exactly what happens with our brains. When we rely on mental shortcuts that are often rooted in stereotype, it can create mental bugs or construction-type obstacles in our way to be able to see the realities of people's experiences. As people, we are all biased. So it's not to argue that bias itself is inherently a bad thing. It's the impact and implication of what happens with that bias that can prove quite challenging. Throughout my life and experience, one of the pieces that I am such an aficionado of and have an affinity toward are safaris. So I try to carve out time every year to go do a bit of volunteer work in various parts of sub-Saharan Africa. But while I'm in the region, I also go on safari. Bias is rooted in that same fight or flight response to where if that lion gets a little too close to my Jeep, I'm out of there. I often tell people you don't have to necessarily be the fastest runner, just faster than the slowest one. And yet we apply this same principle of the fight or flight response to how we engage in the workplace. And it impacts things like selection, expectation, and team dynamics. Take things like likability bias, for example. You saw that play out in the video that I just showed. Women are said to walk a proverbial tightrope in the workplace, where on the one side, if she's too kind, mild, meek, or eager, she's not seen as equipped or ready for moments of leadership. Oftentimes, we see coded language like she lacks executive presence as a means to deny her opportunities for advancement. On the flip side, if she demonstrates the exact same qualities and characteristics as her male counterpart, she might be dubbed as abrasive, or aggressive. Here's the impact of that. Lean In did a research study in 2016 where they found that in overwhelming amounts of cases, 66% of women often receive performance feedback based on her personality, whereas only 1% of her male counterparts receive any kind of feedback based on his personality. This is because we choose to apply certain elements of attribution or performance bias, and every time that we do this, it impacts the likelihood for her to succeed in the workplace, creating some pretty significant challenges around the impact of bias. When bias enters our people processes, it makes it that much more difficult for us to try to thrive toward the impact of conscious inclusion. Second, the impact of identity covering. Dr. Robinson describes her experiences of not only being a woman, but a woman of color, and more specifically, a Black woman. She speaks of it through the lens of saying it's 3 strikes against her. But what does she mean by that? When we consider the literature on topics like intersectionality and identity covering, we quickly discover that the implications that those that find themselves at multiple levels of exclusion face can be quite challenging. Take, for example, the pay gap. When we look at research done in 2020 by the National Women's Law Center, they discovered that while on average, women make 82 cents to every $1 earned by her white and male counterparts, Black women only make 63 cents. Native American women, 60 cents, and Latina women, a staggering 55 cents to every $1 that's earned. When we don't consider the multiple dimensions or the realities of her experience, we can never create inclusive environments in the workplace that are meant to serve her and to show up to positively impact her experience. What's worse is so many folks then look to identity covering as a means to try to get around or sidestep some of these challenges that they experience at work. For many of you, the term identity covering might be a new word for you, but here's the definition of it. It is the downplaying or modifying of an element of our existence simply to fit into the workplace. We focus on things like acceptance, the creation of psychological and physical safety, assets, and creating of opportunities. Yet while the impact of covering tends to be a personal choice, the reality is so much bigger. When we have to cover at work and create a version of ourselves that exists in the workplace vis-a-vis a version that exists outside of the workplace, we often find this impacting the likelihood of creating a sense of belonging, psychological safety, or our ability to retain talent. You see, we see this play out in a number of ways. One of the areas of covering that I like to talk to people about is appearance-based covering. It's where we literally change an element of our appearance just to fit in. Do you realize that in 27 US states, more than half of our nation, it is still legal to fire or not hire somebody because of the color or texture of their hair? Folks, I literally have 40-inch rainbow locks in my hair. I would probably be fired from the majority of jobs that I would seek or desire to take on. The impact of hair discrimination, though, is so troubling because not only is it pervasive in workplaces, it also impacts our school and academic systems as well. What ends up happening is people, particularly Black women, feel the need to chemically alter or chemically straighten their hair just to fit into the professional standards of what is deemed as holding that executive presence. This causes a significant amount of both physical harm and psychological trauma to that experience, meaning that the impact of covering impacts her life in reality so much more. Research done by Deloitte and Dr. Kenji Yoshino have continued to discover that 61% of all of our employees cover in one form, fashion, or another. This is an inherent blocker to our ability to promote conscious inclusion at work. And so then we have to turn to the third and final point, cultural humility. Oftentimes in our workplaces, we find it very difficult to say things like, I don't know, I'm unsure, I'm uncertain. And it's largely because the ethos of corporate America has so often conditioned us to believe that those terms on their own are a sign of weakness. Whereas when it comes to the navigation of topics like identity and people's comfortability in bringing their fullest selves to the workplace, those are a very necessary prerequisite to how we build the conditions that allow people to feel safe and feel that they don't need to cover at work. Now, hear me out. I've said on a number of lectures that I stand in my truth on this. People oftentimes will say authenticity is the bringing of one's full self to work. On the contrary, my full self does not belong in anybody's workplace. Rather, it is the alignment of values that we as individuals hold and how we position those objectively to the values of our organization. Cultural humility forces us to better understand how we build cultural awareness by seeking to grow our own worldview, how we move along this circumplex from awareness to understanding, empathy, and ultimately action. The demonstration of cultural awareness is how we gain greater support and followership of people within our organization. When it's not present, it is truly a felt experience across the organization and can come into significant conflict with our approach to how we build and drive approaches to conscious inclusion. I mentioned that conscious inclusion is all about value centricity in everything that we do. So ask yourself, when I am developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, does it have space and real estate on the people and culture strategy of my organization? Do I see diversity built into the approach that we take to our corporate strategy? Am I able to tie a congruence of experience between my consumer experience and my employee experience? And do I ensure that all employees, whether through total rewards and benefits, our approach to acquisition or mobility, all feel that they have an equitable opportunity to succeed in our workplace? That values alignment is how we build conscious inclusion. Now, I would be remiss to walk away by simply highlighting to you some of the barriers or challenges to conscious inclusion without leaving you with solutions. Similarly, there are 3 key ways that we can drive great impact. Number 1, get over the fear of the unknown. Oftentimes, for many of us, we engage in silence. We choose not to say anything, particularly in the most challenging or traumatic experiences that we might face. But we have to stop viewing the approach to DE&I as only a movement from one trauma or tragedy to the next. We have to avoid the tendency to act with fear and avoid engaging in the conversation. As Simon Sinek has so rightly stated, the navigation of a difficult conversation has to be managed and owned by leaders. Because you lead from the front, you're first to the challenge, you're first to the opportunity. While your personal fear may incentivize you to not want to say anything, that silence can have such a significant impact on your organization and our ability to create inclusive cultures. Challenge that along the way, and inclusion can be built from there. Number 2, be ready to navigate the difficult conversation. Lack of awareness is but an excuse for folks who do not want to get into the dirty work of navigating the uncomfortability. The reality is, it was a lot of rather large structures and strictures like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, nationalism, and so much more that got us to where we are today. It is those isms and phobias that have created the deeply polarized political perspectives that we see today and don't enable us to celebrate political diversity in the workplace. It is those same perspectives that lead to challenges with how we navigate the geopolitics of the day. And yet, if we rely on that lack of awareness or refuse to navigate the difficult conversation, ultimately refuse to engage in deep conversations about conscious inclusion, we have to be proactive in our approach. This means being intentional. When we see or experience moments of bias or microaggressions as they exist in the workplace, get comfortable speaking up and calling them out. We have to do this at an individual level by thinking with a growth mindset, and at an interpersonal level by supporting others and using our voice when the most marginalized amongst us is seemingly unable to do so. And last but not least, go on your own journey of cultural humility and cultural awareness. Proudly declare, I don't know it all. I don't have 100% of all the answers, but I'm committed to learning more, navigating the conversation, and engaging with community. You see, over the last several weeks, for example, as we've had to navigate the deep complexities connected with the ensuing war between Israel and Hamas, I do not identify as Jewish, Muslim, Middle Eastern, Palestinian, Israeli, or otherwise. I don't have the full historical context despite work that I did in coursework in undergrad. As a result, I won't always say the right words. My actions won't always be aligned, and yet I ask folks to assume positive intent and view that well-intentioned nature within the lens of cultural humility and the centering of humanity. By doing this, I'm able to show people that while I don't have all the answers, I can proudly say what I don't know. I can highlight where uncertainty exists, but a commitment that as a leader who is committed to thriving in this space and creating actionable outcomes for all, I will do the work to be better and engage differently. When we do this, cultural awareness and cultural humility drives us ever forward to have the biggest amount of impact organizationally and for people and teams. Throughout our time together over the course of the 6 weeks, if you choose to join us for the certificate program, we'll give you deep exposure to many topics just like what we discussed today and more. We'll do a number of synchronous sessions where you'll hear from me and many lecturers just like this, where we'll equip you not just with an understanding of the theory of the business case for diversity, the theories of how to drive conscious inclusion, but some tangible actions that you can build into effective action plans to start deploying as soon as tomorrow to be able to create great impact within our organizations. Because the reality is, simply bringing diverse voices and diverse faces to the table is not enough. We have to be sources of inspiration, innovation, and empowerment, where people feel that the connected realities of their experience are not just rooted in the membership of marginalization to which they hold, but rather is a part of a macro commitment on behalf of our organizations and institutions to breed visibility, transparency, and accountability. I hope to see you in the course soon. With that, I'm happy to hand it back to Allison for some additional context and details about our course, as well as to answer any questions that you might have for me.
Thank you so much, Jarvis.
I hope that you learned a lot and loved learning from Jarvis as much as I do. Every single time I'm captivated and I can't look away. And I feel like he really brings this incredible energy and expertise to everything that he does. So if you are hoping to continue your learning journey with Jarvis, we would love for you to join us in our Applied Inclusive Leadership Strategies Certificate. And I'm about to give you an overview of what this program looks like, but I also want to call out for you to enter your questions in now as well, because when I am done giving this overview, we'll open it up to your questions and we want to get to as many of your questions as possible. So if you have a question about the program or about what you heard during the video, you can click on the bottom bar of Zoom, click on Q&A and type and submit your questions there. And that is where I will be reading questions off for Jarvis. I also do want to say, I saw this question in the chat earlier. We are recording this session and we will circulate a recording from this session to everyone who registered. So you will get the access to this video quite soon. So the first thing I always like to start with when we're talking about this program is why inclusive leadership matters. I think this has always been a top priority for a lot of learners, being able to make the case, especially if your employer may be supporting this with tuition assistance. But I think it's become even more important in the last couple of months when we have seen programs that are involved in diversity, equity, inclusion in any way, facing a ton of polarization that's been really renewed. So I think being able to take a moment to look at the data can be really grounding and really helpful. Because although the terminology DEI has become incredibly controversial, the data actually paints a really practical and specific story. And what that story is that being a more inclusive leader sets you up for success in a number of different areas that will both positively impact your career prospects and your career trajectory, and also the impact that you're able to make on your organizations. According to Forbes, more diverse companies are 33% more profitable than their less diverse counterparts. In addition, the Harvard Business Review found that companies with the highest DEI scores have an 80% higher ability to adapt to change. And I find that particular stat perhaps the most relevant of them all in the times that we're facing right now, where things are changing so rapidly and we're having to adapt so much. In addition, according to Boston Consulting Group, professionals who work for inclusive organizations report being 3 times happier and therefore are more likely to stay at organizations versus those who feel that their organizations are not inclusive. However, there is a big however. Currently, organizations don't really know how to do it systemically. Probably many of you have attended at least one mandatory training or one-off celebration that hopefully felt really great and meaningful at the time, but didn't lead to lasting change. And the data does bear this out. According to McKinsey, 63 to 80% of employees say that change is happening too slowly. And in addition, CIO finds that only 5% of organizations hold executives accountable for racial and ethnic diversity and promotions, and only 7% for gender diversity. And one of the key takeaways that Jarvis always says in both his presentations and also in the program is that one of the biggest factors for success is whether an organization has fully embedded DEI into their business, into their core business proposition, their core business way of doing things. And as you can see, most organizations have not, because they're not measuring the outcomes. So who is this program for? We built this program with 3 major target audiences in mind. First, we're looking to help managers and leaders who are creating more inclusive and diverse teams, departments, and organizations. Secondly, this program is for HR and DEI professionals who are developing and implementing solutions. And then thirdly, this program is for you. Just by showing up today and making the time in this really, really busy time, you have raised your hand and stepped up to be the advocates that we desperately need in this world. And something I think is so strong about this curriculum is that it does really meet you where you are. And so we have had people who are individual contributors who are pretty early in their career, all the way up to chief diversity officers who have worked in diversity and inclusion their entire career. And both ends of the spectrum, plus the folks in between, have reported having a really great experience. So now I'll give you a little bit of an overview of how the program runs. It is a 6-week program. Each week requires about 2.5 hours of work. And that work entails doing readings, watching videos, completing assignments, and participating in discussion forums. We really want to make sure you and your cohort feel like you're able to bond and learn from one another, and we get really good feedback on that. And then in addition, you'll get 3 live sessions with Jarvis on September 25th, October 9th, and October 30th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So we get a lot of positive feedback that this is the best of both worlds. It's really flexible. So if you know, for example, that you're going to be out of the country on week 2, no problem. You'll have access to the full course the moment it opens, and you can self-pace your work. But at the same time, you have enough interaction with Jarvis and the teaching team and your peers that it feels really rigorous and feels really alive. And I've heard a lot of really heartwarming stories of cohort members who have stayed in touch and stayed supportive of one another after the program ends. This is what the full program at a glance looks like, but we're about to go through week by week. One of my favorite parts of this program is that Jarvis chose to create this program around competencies rather than spending too much time on vocab or introductory material, which is something I've seen in other trainings. And so week 1 is indeed a level setting week. You need to have one. In week 1, we learn how we understand diversity, equity, and inclusion by analyzing the benefits and challenges to achieving DEI in the workplace. And this is where you'll learn foundational vocabulary and frameworks. However, starting in week 2, we start looking at really specific competencies. So in week 2, you'll learn cultural competency and inclusive communication. And this week in particular focuses on global teams. So if you work with team members or vendors or customers who have different cultural backgrounds than you, this could be really positive for you. Week 3 helps you to recognize, address, mitigate, and prevent implicit bias in yourself and others. Week 4 is learning how to manage diversity and conflict. And what I really love about this week too is that Jarvis always points out that conflict is not always bad. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times that's actually where like growth and creativity and innovation comes from. So this week helps you to both identify when a conflict should actually be facilitated, so actually encouraged and structured, versus when it should be resolved, and you get the skills for both. Week 5 is around promoting structural equity. So this goes beyond the interpersonal or the personal, which that's another thing I think is really strong about this program, is that a lot of other programs kind of stop at implicit bias or having difficult conversations. But this one looks at policies and practices and also KPIs to see what is getting measured, what is getting embedded in the way that things are done that may be invisible and may be in need of a tweak, or actually may be doing really well and needs to be systematized. And then lastly, in week 6, you learn how to lead for diversity and inclusion, putting everything together that you have learned, identifying your own specific sphere of influence, and actually writing and getting feedback on an individualized action project where you write out your plan for how you want to apply this at work based off of your sphere of influence. So if you're an individual contributor, you might write about, an ERG that you might join. If you are the chief diversity officer, you might write about a whole strategy you want to put together. And either way, you'll get personalized feedback to make sure it's as optimal as possible. By the end of the program, we commit that you will have achieved the following outcomes. And I'm really happy to report that actually the last cohort, 100% of them said that we met every one of these learning objectives. And that really never happens. That's really exciting. You will learn to develop effective, inclusive leadership initiatives by setting clear goals, creating an action plan, and tracking measurable success. You'll improve your communication and collaboration across diverse teams by fostering an environment built on trust and respect. You'll gain leadership skills to navigate the complexities of diversity-related challenges and effectively manage and resolve conflicts. You'll identify and dismantle structural inequalities within your organization that hinder progress. And you'll promote a culture of continuous learning where curiosity thrives and new perspectives are embraced, and everyone around you learns the skills that you've learned here as well. So I hope you're excited and that you want to join us. We'd love to have you. The enrollment deadline is not until September 16th, but we do fill our class on a first come, first serve basis. So I encourage you, if you know you want to join, I encourage you to enroll now. And just for being on this info session, you get a special discount code of info10 that will give you 10% off when you enroll. If you just type that in into the promo code field when you enroll. And all you do is fill out this short form, which we'll email out to you, don't worry. And you're in. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to turn things over to your questions. And so if you have any questions about anything that Jarvis covered or about the program, I would love to take them. And I see we have questions in both the Q&A and the chat, so give me just one moment to take a look at both of them. Great. The first question I see is, do you have group discounts for a team that would like to attend together? And first of all, I just want to say thank you for that interest, because there is a lot of research that shows that sometimes when change in general, not just DEI specific change, falls apart, it's because there weren't enough champions to move it forward. And so I really love it when teams join us, because I think that's going to make for a much more powerful, sustainable, and effective application of your learnings. And we do have group discounts to enable that. If you send 3 or more people, you get a discount of 10% per person. And if you send 7 or more people, it's a discount of 20% per person. So thank you for that question. And yes, please send us a full team. I think it's really powerful and it will help you see the results you want to see. Okay, next question. How is Brown University responding to the current administration's attack on diversity, equity, inclusion policies and practices? Yeah, it's a great question. And I will preface my answer by saying that I am not part of senior leadership at Brown, and I am not part of our legal counsel. And so I can't speak to this at too high of a level. But what I can say is that Brown University remains really committed to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also remains very committed to staying within the law. And so we have been continuously paying attention to and updating our practices around laws as they change to make sure that we are fully compliant with every single new legal action that has come our way. And for all of the reasons that you just saw in this presentation, we still really believe in it. We think that it makes a really big difference for us and our community, and it makes us stronger and better. And definitely one of the things I've been really excited about is that we are fully supported to continue to offer this program, which has had such tangible, powerful results in the community. Another good question. What are you noticing in the US as a result of the February 2025 executive orders? Are companies standing up to a large enough degree to push back? And that's something I would definitely love. Oh my goodness, perfect timing, Jarvis. I was literally just about to say that's definitely something I would love Jarvis's perspective on, but I'll try to answer it. But I will not try to answer it. I think you are in a much better position to answer this question, Jarvis. So let me repeat the question. The question is, what are you noticing in the US as a result of the February 2025 executive orders aimed at dismantling DEI across the federal government and targeting DEI programs in the private sectors? Are companies standing up to a large enough degree to push back? Oh, Jarvis, I think you've frozen. Can you still hear me?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Oh, good. Yes, now we can.
Fantastic. I love this question. And hello, everybody. It's so great to get connected with each and every one of you. I'm glad that you were able to attend and hear a little bit more about our approach to conscious inclusion, as well as how this program helps contribute to those experiences as well. This has been such a hot button question for almost every organization that we've worked with, is how do you navigate the executive orders and the push that's often felt in terms of corporate experience? Let me first lay out a bit of the duality that organizations are experiencing. For publicly traded companies, many of them who have seen topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion go to shareholder vote have seen their shareholders stand firm, actually, in the commitment that DEIB has a really strong effect and impact on their organization. If you take a look at every single one of these proposals, they've either been voted down 99-1 or 98-2 in terms of the organization needing to remove elements of DEI from its strategy. An organization attempting to navigate that paired with the executive orders can create quite tension within the company. When you think about the reason business exists in a lot of ways, it's ultimately value creation for that shareholder. However, for many of these large companies, several of them are indeed federal contractors. And so how they maintain a level of federal compliance amidst the executive order paired with social and political rhetoric surrounding the current zeitgeist of DEI with their shareholder propositions and create a lot of issues. Here's what I've noticed. It's incredibly variable based on industry, based on sector, and based on organizational commitment, how some companies are handling it. For those that are not federal contractors, for example, many organizations have changed nomenclature and elements of how they talk about or engage in conversations around DEI to remain federally compliant, at least at a surface level. However, as they think about the maintenance of things like their talent programs and initiatives, their commitment to actually creating equitable outcomes through things like compensation approaches, benefits, policy, and how they advocate for legislation around it, they do remain steadfast to that. In other instances, though, you are seeing companies rid themselves of the entirety of their DEI programs. What I would argue, though, is that these organizations never had the infrastructure built to support DEI to begin with, largely because it was built as a tethered add-on to other elements of either their HR programmer strategy, their social impact strategy, or more. For those organizations, though, that are showing an actual tangible commitment where there was integration and embedment across brand, across product, people teams within HR, as well as their social and community impact work, what they are doing is simply refining how we talk about it. They're creating new tools and resources so that advocacy for the work within their organization happens deeper within their org, and so that people leaders feel more of a sense of empowerment to support this work. I think it's more than appropriate to actually name names in this space. I think some organizations that have obviously gotten a lot of media perspective about the rating of some of their DEI programs include more recently, obviously, companies like Target earlier this year, but also organizations like T-Mobile, as of just a couple of days ago. But what we have to acknowledge is there's such deeply pervasive work happening at the federal level above and beyond simply an executive order. We are seeing, for example, the SEC put in place rules or policies related to mergers and acquisitions of different organizations and essentially blocking potential mergers or acquisitions for companies that have maintained their approach to DEI. And so, what these orgs are having to navigate, in my opinion, is not a condition of saying it's a good org or a bad org, but it's is our decisions being made in good faith within that organization or not? Because on the flip side, you have incredibly notable examples of organizations like Costco, for example, Levi Strauss and Company, Block, the company that runs Cash App, Square, and Title, who have maintained their commitment, recognizing the impact that this has between both consumer experience and employee experience. So that's how you can think about that.
Thank you. That's an incredible answer. Next question is, I work in the nonprofit sector, and I'm curious if you can let me know where I can get data that's more geared towards DEI in the nonprofit sector. And also they're wondering if this is the right training for them in the nonprofit sector.
Recording in progress.
Hey, but I'm back. I'm joining on my phone.
Sounds like we might be getting audio from two sources, so we're echoing a little bit. Can you? Perfect. Yep, that worked. Perfect. Did you hear the question? I'm trying to repeat it.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I love this question as well because I think nonprofits have always played such a critical role in the driving and advocacy of this work. And yet the reality is you've often been left out of conversations related to DEI, which I think is a huge miss for how we build connection and navigate this space. And so a few things that I want to highlight here. So there's a ton of resources and data actually geared toward the impact of DEI on nonprofits and how we build more efficacy and how we support this. Nora, if you can, send me a note on LinkedIn, if you can, and I will forward you a ton of hyperlinks and bodies of work that support this. But I will say as of 2017, and then I think they did a re-release in 2021, McKinsey and Company had done some research work to understand how nonprofits should think about navigating the DEI space. I think it's specifically challenging right now, given that most nonprofits, particularly if you hold 501c3 status, will find the need to be necessarily nonpartisan in their approach. And unfortunately, DEI has traversed into a space that does exist on party lines. And so to continue a lot of your efforts in the nonprofit space could be read as a direct attack or direct affront of the current administration, running a risk of the impact of maintaining your 501c3 status. And so I think for some organizations where it's possible, for them to either ones that are just now starting up or organizations that want to switch their classification. Several are moving into a 501c4 space where political advocacy is a bit more open or there's a bit more opportunity to demonstrate some partisan based contributions in terms of political actioning. But I recognize a ton of the challenges that can come up for nonprofits. So first and foremost, I will send you some resources and data that supports those experiences. But I think to the second part of your question regarding training specifically for nonprofits, within our coursework that we do within the certificate program, we do indeed spend some time talking about the nonprofit sector and how a lot of this work is applicable in that space. Within the running of my own business, the Rainbow Disruption, of which we bring a lot of those cases into the work within the certificate program, we work about 30% of our portfolio are nonprofit organizations. And for me, that is incredibly important because nonprofits, in a lot of ways, move community advocacy and activism work ever forward that helps set the stage or grounding for how DEI can come to life in organizations. What's more, the social impact or community impact segments of most Fortune 500 companies are contributing to a lot these same nonprofits that we're working with and supporting. And so it is critical that we start to see a level of congruence being built around both strategically and rhetorically how we talk about DEI in this construct across both the for-profit, private sector space, as well as the way in which we challenge certain public sector or government focused work to then support our nonprofit organizations in meaningful ways and capacities.
Thank you. That's amazing. This is the last question that came in so far. So I wanted to just one last call, like if you're typing or you were thinking about asking a question, I'll give like 20 more seconds for new questions to come in. But I also wanted to just add one thing kind of more generally about the program was that one goal that we have with the way that we chose to structure our program is we want sectors to be able to learn from one another. And that is feedback we've heard from participants that, someone from the finance sector all of a sudden learned a ton from someone in the government sector who learned a ton from someone in the nonprofit sector. And so we do incorporate case studies, as Jarvis mentioned, from all different sectors. And so there are going to be times in the curriculum where you look at the curriculum and you say, wow, like this piece is speaking to me specifically. But there are also going to be times where it is intentionally going to be from different sectors because the goal is for us to collate the best practices across sectors and to be able to help you have the fullest toolkit possible to bring back to your organization. And that does mean you'll do the translation work of figuring out what will and won't work within your organization.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think anything else has come in. Thank you so much, Jarvis. I always learn so much from you, and I know this is a really busy time for you too, so I'm really appreciative that you found the time to come here and to answer these great questions. Thank you, everyone who came today, for asking such great questions. You didn't make it easy for us. You asked the hard-hitting and the important ones, and I'm glad that you did. And I hope to see you in our virtual classroom starting in September. Thank you, everyone, so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.